The sun dipped behind the jagged skyline of Manhattan, its fading light catching the polished glass of Barrington Tower. After 25 years of walking these same marble floors, I could almost navigate them by muscle memory. At 6 p.m., the building was quieter than usual, the kind of silence that hummed with fluorescent lights and distant air vents. I headed toward the server room for one last compliance check habit, more than duty. When I swiped my badge against the scanner, the reader flashed red. A sharp beep echoed in the empty hallway. I frowned, swiped again. Another red light. I tried a third time, slower, as if patience could fix what felt like a glitch. Beep. Access denied. Before I could call it. My phone buzzed. A single subject line burned into my eyes, effective immediately. Your employment is terminated. Security will escort you. My chest tightened, but I didn't gasp or shout. A lifetime of corporate etiquette had trained me to absorb humiliation in silence. Marcus, the night shift security officer, appeared moments later, his expression stiff. "Miss Winslow, I need your badge, laptop and phone." His voice faltered slightly. He couldn't meet my eyes. I handed over each item with steady hands, watching my reflection in the glass walls behind him, composed, professional, erased. We walked past the mezzanine where a few junior analysts lingered. I caught their startled whispers and wide-eyed stares. For a heartbeat, I wanted to shout, to warn them that loyalty here meant nothing. Instead, I lifted my chin and kept moving, the clack of my heels echoing like a farewell. The glass doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss, and the evening air hit me like a wall sharp. Cold, smelling faintly of rain and exhaust. Across the Hudson, the first lights of Hoboken twinkled, and behind me, the tower that had defined my life glowed like nothing had happened inside its walls. I tightened my coat against the wind and walked toward the street, each step slow and deliberate, as if I could still control something in a world that had just upended mine. By the time I reached the corner, my phone vibrated again in my coat pocket. I pulled it out, bracing myself, and saw the name that confirmed exactly who had orchestrated this. By the time I reached Hoboken, the sky over the Hudson had deepened to a bruised purple. The lights of Manhattan flickered across the river, each window a reminder of the world I had just been cut out of. My apartment was as I had left it that morning, neat, quiet and hollow. I slipped off my heels by the door and walked across the hardwood floor, the silence settling around me like a second coat. I went straight to the small study at the back of the apartment. Against the far wall sat a steel safe, unremarkable to anyone else but holding the only leverage I had left in my life. I spun the combination with steady fingers and pulled open the door. Inside lay 2 matte black encrypted hard drives, my silent companions for the last 2 years. I ran my fingertips over them, feeling the weight of all the late nights and cautious backups. They weren't trophies. They were insurance. A photo frame on the shelf above the safe caught my eye. I picked it up. It was from 10 years ago, me and Lucas, smiling at a cabin in Vermont. Before the arguments about missed anniversaries and overnight office stays, he had walked away saying, "You're married to your job, Avery." I had thought he was being dramatic. Tonight, I knew he was right. I set the frame down and turned to my laptop. Habit pushed me to scan my personal email. Even as exhaustion pressed at my temples, that was when I saw the forwarded chain from months ago, a small red flag I had archived and ignored. Ensure termination 15 hours before pension vesting. No exceptions. Bryce's name glared from the sender line, addressed to HR. My hands curled into fists. For a moment, grief and rage fought for space inside me. But then they fused into something sharper. I wasn't a victim. I was a woman with proof. They had tried to erase me with a single email and a beep at a scanner. I closed the safe with a quiet click, slid the drives into my bag, and powered up my laptop. The city across the river glimmered like a challenge, and I began to prepare for my next move. The apartment had grown colder as night settled fully over Hoboken. I sat in my small home office, the only light coming from my laptop screen and the bridge across the river, its lights flickering like Morse code against the dark water. My reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, tired, resolute, and finally ready to stop playing by rules that no one else honored. I plugged in the first hard drive and navigated to the folder I had labeled only with a single letter E. 2 years of evidence lived here quietly collected in stolen moments and late-night backups. The files told a story that the company's glossy annual reports never would. I took a breath and logged into the SEC's whistleblower portal. My fingers hesitated above the keys, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Once I uploaded this, there was no going back, no NDA, no corporate loyalty. Nothing would matter. I was stepping into a different life. The progress bar crawled forward as the files transferred. When the confirmation message finally appeared, a strange calm washed over me, followed immediately by a tremor in my hands. I wasn't done yet. I opened a separate, encrypted email account and attached a smaller package select files, curated for impact. These were sent to 3 of our largest institutional investors, the kind that boasted zero tolerance for unethical practices in their glossy brochures. I didn't need to say much. The documents spoke for themselves. After the last message left my outbox, I leaned back in my chair. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the city outside. I felt the gravity of what I had done settle over me, like standing at the edge of a cliff after the jump, suspended in air, knowing the fall had already begun. I shut down my laptop, slipped the drives back into the safe, and stared out across the Hudson, waiting for the night to give way to the storm I had just set in motion. The city outside my window hummed in restless fragments, distant sirens, the low thrum of traffic on the turnpike, a ferry horn echoing across the Hudson. I sat barefoot at my desk, the glow of my laptop painting the walls in soft blue. The room smelled faintly of coffee and cold metal from the hard drives. Like my own little war room, I started with the fail-safe. Over the years, I had built a system of approvals no one else fully understood. Certain financial disclosures and regulatory reports couldn't leave Baratin servers without my electronic signature. Tonight, I revoked that authority from anyone else, rerouting final controls to a personal encryption key. If they wanted to bypass me now, they'd find themselves in a dead loop. I connected the second drive and ran a final backup of everything: emails, spreadsheets, meeting notes. Each file that copied felt like another nail in the coffin of the empire I'd helped maintain for decades. My stomach tightened with every progress bar that reached 100%. My phone buzzed against the desk. A message from Nolan Pierce. The one person in IT I still trusted, HR, is scrubbing your files. Bryce said, she'll regret crossing me. I stared at the words for a long moment, my pulse hammering in my throat. Even knowing I'd prepared for this, a flicker of doubt slid in. Could I really do this? Could I take down the company that had once been my life's work? A part of me wanted to close the laptop and pretend none of this had happened to let someone else carry the weight. Instead, I inhaled deeply, tightened my grip on the mouse, and finished encrypting the last set of data. The files now existed in 3 places, one on each drive, and one off-site in a secure cloud they couldn't touch. The final upload finished just before midnight. I powered down the laptop and leaned back in my chair, my reflection faint in the dark window. For the first time in years, the office tower across the river didn't feel like home. It felt like a battlefield waiting for dawn. The smell of strong coffee filled my kitchen as I sat at the small table by the window. Staring at the Manhattan skyline across the Hudson, the towers looked sharp in the morning light, all glass and steel pretending to be untouchable. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, letting the heat calm the tremor in my fingers. At 7:45 a.m., my phone buzzed. Nolan's name lit up the screen. Systems are frozen. They can't submit the reports. Panic starting. I pictured Bryce pacing the executive floor, demanding answers as the quarterly submissions hit a wall he hadn't seen coming. I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the bitter warmth ground me. By 8:45 a.m., the phone rang again, this time an unfamiliar number. I answered, already knowing who it was. Avery. Bryce's voice was tight, strained in a way I'd never heard. There's been a misunderstanding. Come back in. We can fix this. I let the silence stretch for a beat before replying, my tone as steady as my pulse. I'm meeting my attorney at 9:30. Avery, be reasonable. We can discuss your... I ended the call before he could finish. Reasonable had been my language for 25 years. It had earned me loyalty, long nights, and an empty apartment, nothing more. At 9:00 a.m., the first alert popped on my laptop. The SEC had announced an investigation into Baratin Strategic Holdings. Within minutes, financial feeds erupted. Clients began to pull their money, citing fiduciary concerns. By 9:15 a.m., the stock ticker was a bleeding line of red. I refreshed the feed again and again as the numbers plunged. $2.1 billion in market value evaporated in less than an hour. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the refrigerator, the only sound in the room. My coffee had gone cold, but I barely noticed. Across the river, the tower that had cast its shadow over my life was crumbling in real time, and I watched it all from the quiet safety of my kitchen, already thinking about my next move. By mid-morning, I couldn't sit in the apartment any longer. The walls felt heavy with the weight of everything I had set in motion. I grabbed my coat and drove to Liberty State Park, where the river opened wide toward the harbor and the Statue of Liberty watched over the restless water. The air was sharp with the smell of salt and distant fuel. Autumn leaves tumbled along the path, catching in the gusts that came off the Hudson. I walked slowly, my hands in my pockets, letting the cold wind sting my face. Across the river, Manhattan gleamed like nothing had changed, though I knew the inside of Baratin Tower was unraveling in chaos. I stopped at the railing and let my eyes follow the water. For the first time in years, I felt something close to freedom, not the glossy kind they sell in retirement brochures, but the raw kind that comes with letting go. Yet grief moved through me too, heavy and quiet. I had given 25 years to an institution that tossed me aside with a single email. My phone buzzed in my pocket, an email from the SEC. We confirm receipt of your whistleblower filing. Based on preliminary review, you may be eligible for a reward of 10 to 30% of any monetary penalties collected. The words blurred for a moment as a tear slipped free, cooling quickly in the wind. The money was irrelevant next to the vindication. I wiped my cheek and kept walking. Another vibration, a message from Nolan. Some of us are proud of you. We're rooting for you from the inside. I stared at the screen, the lump in my throat tightening. Even in betrayal and chaos, there were still pockets of loyalty, of belief in doing the right thing. I slipped the phone back into my coat and turned toward the skyline. The river, a quiet witness between me and the empire I had shaken. For the first time, I began to wonder if I was truly done or if the next step was to walk straight back into the fire. By the time I returned to my apartment, the sun had begun to sink behind the skyline, turning the Hudson into a band of copper and shadow. The quiet inside was almost disorienting after the wind and open space of the park. I hung my coat, made tea I barely tasted, and sat by the window as lights flickered on across Manhattan. Somewhere in that forest of glass, my old office was in shambles. My phone rang, its vibration sharp against the wooden table. The caller ID displayed a name I had never seen on my personal line, Eleanor Shaw. Miss Winslow. Her voice was low and measured, carrying the authority of someone who didn't need to raise it. Bryce is finished. The board has met twice today. We want you back as interim CEO. I gripped the edge of the table, feeling my pulse in my fingertips. The words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through everything I thought I knew about how this would end. I see, I said carefully. You want the woman you escorted out like a criminal to come back and clean up the mess? Exactly that, Eleanor replied without flinching. And Avery, if you walk away, Bryce will spin this as sabotage. He will call you a bitter employee who tanked the company for revenge. Some will believe him if you're not here to prove otherwise. I leaned back, letting the weight of her warning settle. My apartment felt smaller than ever. Part of me wanted to lock the door, take the whistleblower reward, and watch Barrington burn to the ground without lifting a finger. But another part, the part that had spent decades protecting people's money and fighting for principles that no one else defended, couldn't stomach letting Bryce control the narrative. Eleanor didn't press. She simply said, "If you decide to return, you'll have full autonomy. I'll make sure of it." Then she ended the call, leaving me with the city lights and my own heartbeat. I stared out across the river, the last streaks of daylight fading behind the towers, and realized the war I had started was offering me a new kind of battlefield. I called Eleanor the next morning, my voice steady though my hands were cold around the phone. "I'll come back," I said, "but only under my conditions." But only. My pension vests immediately. My whistleblower status is protected in writing. I have complete autonomy over personnel decisions. And the board issues a public acknowledgement of past wrongdoing. Without all of that, I stay home. There was the faintest pause before she answered. "Agreed. The documents will be ready when you arrive." 48 hours after I had been escorted out in silence, I returned to Barrington Tower. The sky was a clear winter blue, the kind that made the glass facade blaze with light. I entered through the executive entrance this time, the same doors I had never been allowed to touch as a compliance officer. My new badge slid through the reader. Beep. Access granted. The sound was soft, but it vibrated through me. I stepped into the private lobby, its marble polished to a mirror shine, and caught my own reflection, a woman who had been thrown away and had come back as the one holding the knife. Employees noticed me as I crossed the floor toward the elevator bank. Conversations faltered, phones lowered, some watched with awe, some with fear, and a few with open uncertainty. The whispers followed me like a trail. "She's back." How? On the ride up to the executive floor. I let the quiet hum of the elevator settle me. The doors opened to a half-empty floor. The plaques with Bryce's name had already been removed. In the corner office that was now mine. Sunlight poured across an empty desk. Waiting. I placed my bag down and opened the blinds fully, letting the light spill into the room like a reclamation. The city stretched before me, alive and sharp, and for the first time in decades, I felt like I wasn't trapped inside it. The building that had cast me out now bent to my hand, and yet I knew the hard part was only beginning. I turned to my laptop, ready to start the process of rebuilding from the inside. The first executive meeting as interim CEO felt like walking into a courtroom I controlled. The long mahogany boardroom table was half empty, and the air carried the tense hush of unspoken fear. I laid out the facts without raising my voice. Those who had actively participated in the fraudulent schemes were finished. Their termination letters were already signed. Security would escort them out within the hour. The remaining executives shifted in their seats, some pale, some relieved. I turned to Isla Rivera, my quiet but sharp mentee from the compliance team. "Isla, you're now chief of staff," I said. Her eyes widened, but she nodded, voice steady when she promised she wouldn't let me down. I also pulled Nolan Pierce into the circle of trust, making his IT oversight official. Loyalty had earned its place at my table. By midday, Bryce tried to strike back. A media alert flashed across my phone, a thinly veiled smear, accusing me of sabotage and greed, claiming I had orchestrated a malicious takedown for personal profit. I didn't flinch. Eleanor Shaw moved faster than I could have imagined. Within an hour, she authorized the public release of select internal emails, Bryce's own words detailing the plan to fire me hours before my pension vested. The smear collapsed under its own weight that afternoon. I walked into the company's main auditorium for the town hall meeting. Nearly 1,000 employees filled the space, and many more watched from regional offices. I spoke plainly. With no script, Baratin will rebuild on 4 pillars: transparency, accountability, protection, renewal. Those who did the right thing will be protected. Those who did wrong will face consequences. And together, we will make this company worthy of the trust it once demanded. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then the applause rose, rolling through the room like a tide. A few employees in the front row wiped their eyes. It was the first flicker of hope I'd seen in this place in years. I left the stage knowing this was only the first step. The culture shift had begun, and the weight of shaping Baratin's future now sat fully on my shoulders. Night settled over Manhattan, turning the skyline into a mosaic of gold and shadow. I sat in the corner office that now bore my name, the glass walls reflecting the city lights and the faint glow of my computer. The desk was bare except for a single notebook, the same one I had carried for 25 years, filled with meeting notes, ethical reminders, and quiet warnings no one wanted to hear. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence of the office wrap around me. 25 years of sacrifice had brought me here. Though not in the way I ever imagined. They had fired me to save $3.4 million, a neat line item on a spreadsheet. In doing so, they lost $2, $1 billion in a single day, and the illusion of invincibility they had worn like armor. The memory of that red badge beep still lingered, but it no longer stung. It was the sound of a door closing and another opening the line between who I was and who I had become. Revenge had burned hot at first, a spark that drove me to act. But sitting here now, I realized it had cooled into something different. This was no longer about punishment. It was about rebirth. The soft buzz of an incoming message lit up my screen. A simple note from Nolan Town Hall replayed in the break room. People stayed late just to watch. Feels like hope again. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting that sink in. My real legacy wouldn't be the headlines or the SEC investigation. It would be the people who stayed, the ones who learned that integrity still had a place in a glass tower overlooking the Hudson. I stood and walked to the window, the city stretching endlessly below. My reflection met my eyes in the dark glass, steady and unflinching. They thought my story ended at 6 p.m. I murmured to the night. They were wrong. That was just the end of theirs.